The American Republic is easily the most dominant force on the planet. A former Prime Minister from Canada once described living next to the United States as sleeping next to an elephant. If the elephant rolls over, you're absolutely going to notice, and if you're not careful, you're going to get crushed. So, next on Authentic, the unique character of the United States of America. We're in Psalm 50, and we're going to jump down to verse 16 because this is where it suddenly gets interesting for people who like to follow the religious culture of America. So maybe we'll just start reading the psalm itself. And in this passage, God is talking to people who profess to be His people, but their lives are telling a completely different story. And I'll bet you can already see where we might be going with this. Here's what it says. But to the wicked, God says, "What right have you to declare my statutes or take my covenant in your mouth, seeing you hate instruction and cast my words behind you? When you saw a thief and you consented with him and have been a partaker with adulterers, you give your mouth to evil and your tongue frames deceit. You sit and speak against your brother. You slander your own mother's son. These things you have done, and I kept silent. You thought that I was altogether like you, but I will rebuke you and set them in order before your eyes." You know, one of the things that I noticed right after moving to the United States was the way that a lot of American Christians were busy complaining that Christianity is basically dead or dying here in North America. And what I kept hearing from people was this idea that we are now living in post-Christian America. And in some sense, I guess I can see why someone might read the data that way, because there absolutely have been changes over the last century. The Judeo-Christian values that people once took for granted, the values that helped to hold churches and families together, well, they have receded into the background compared to where they used to be. And it's true that a lot of mainline Christian churches are suffering from, well, empty pews syndrome, a problem that seems to be getting worse by the day. So, on the one hand, there is some truth to what I've been told. There is a sense in which America is moving into a post-Christian era. But on the other hand, my first instinct when I heard that was, look, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, when you're an outsider coming to this country to live, one of the first things that just slaps you upside the head is how openly religious this country is. And it's not like I came here from some heathen totalitarian state where Christianity has been banned by law. I came here from Canada. Now, true enough, Canada does seem to have more legal restrictions on free speech and religious expression, but it's not like I came here from communist China where they bulldoze churches that don't have a permit from the government. One of the first things I noticed when I got here was just how open Americans are with their religious beliefs. I mean, people on the shuttle bus from the airport were talking about the Bible with perfect strangers, and nobody seemed to feel uncomfortable. Far more people appeared to be churchgoers than I was used to, even though it's entirely possible that Americans just talk about it more. And even though we did have religious broadcasting in Canada, I mean, I was a part of that world, the sheer number of religious channels and the prevalence of Christian programming in this country nearly blew my socks off. I mean, you can complain all you want that America is now post-Christian, but I've got to tell you, it is far more Christian than any other place I've ever lived or worked. In fact, back in the late 18th century, when America was born and the Constitution was ratified, church membership rates in this country were something like 17%. And today, I mean, if I remember this statistic right, today it's more like 34%. So while the number of churchgoers might be dropping, it's still a lot better than it was just a couple of hundred years ago. So this idea that America is a post-Christian nation, personally, I don't buy it. And I know that my evidence is anecdotal at this point, but from Alexis de Tocqueville forward, visitors to this country have all come away with the same impression. This is a distinctly religious and distinctly Christian country. After his famous tour of the continent, de Tocqueville continually remarked on the distinctly Christian character of the United States. Just listen to this comment about the early bookstores that he visited here in America. He writes, "For one finds a multitude of elementary texts intended to impart the rudiments of human knowledge. Most of these works were written in Europe. The Americans reprint them in a form adapted for their use. Then there is an almost endless number of religious books, Bibles, sermons, pious anecdotes, controversies, and reports published by charitable societies. Finally, there is the lengthy catalog of political pamphlets. American parties do battle not with books, but with pamphlets which circulate with incredible rapidity, survive for a brief time, and then die." Now, modern bookstores might not be quite like that, but again, I've got to tell you, as an outsider coming into this country, it isn't that much different than what he saw all those years ago. For all the rough and tumble, defiant frontier attitudes that marked the birth of America, de Tocqueville noticed that Americans were remarkably literate people, and the Bible was at the very foundation of their literacy. Here's another famous observation of his, this time about the people who forged a new life in the midst of a wilderness. He writes, "Everything around him, the American that is primitive and wild, but he is the product, so to speak, of 18 centuries of effort and experience. He wears the clothes and speaks the language of the city. He knows the past, is curious about the future, and argues about the present. He, the American, is a highly civilized man who, having plunged into the wilds of the New World with his Bible, axe, and newspapers, has chosen to live for a time in the forest." So there really is a reason that people say the United States of America is a Christian nation. And it's not the reason that a lot of modern Christians think. It's not a Christian nation in the sense that God intended this place to be a theocracy with an official state religion. In fact, it's the complete opposite. It was built on the key principles that came out of the Protestant Reformation, which eventually landed on the idea that matters of personal conscience should be left to the individual rather than the government. And I only wish I had time to expound on that thought. But go and check out our online bookstore and grab a copy of a little book we've got called Final Empire if you want to see why that's true, why that's the case with America. This was a country where you were free to live a Christian life the way you thought it should happen. Or for that matter, not live a Christian life at all if that's what you wanted. No government interference. So from the very beginning, the Bible loomed large on the intellectual landscape of America. And there's no denying that it's still to be found there today. And I know if you were born here in this country, you might struggle to see it. Kind of like, well, I didn't know my Dutch immigrant father had a Dutch accent until other kids told me that he did. I mean, you grew up here, and so there's a good chance you don't see the difference between the religious culture of America and the rest of the world. But if you come to America from somewhere else, you can't miss this. Now, I have to take a break, but I don't want you to move a muscle because when I come back, I'm going to talk to you about some of the things I noticed right away when I got here to this country, and I think you'll find this interesting.
Life can throw a lot at us. Sometimes we don't have all the answers. But that's where the Bible comes in. It's our guide to a more fulfilling life. Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we've created the Discover Bible Guides to be your guide to the Bible. They're designed to be simple, easy to use, and provide answers to many of life's toughest questions. And they're absolutely free. So jump online now, or give us a call and start your journey of discovery.
Pay careful attention in any election season, and you're going to find something really interesting. It's almost inevitable. It's invariable. A candidate for high political office at some point in some speech is going to quote the Bible. It's as if they're trying to reassure us that they're good and decent people. Right? They're trying to reassure us, hey, I'm one of you. I know the religious code for the United States. And to date, no American president has ever openly professed to be an atheist because everybody quietly knows that in the United States of America, atheists don't win the White House. And that's what brings me to the 50th Psalm. Because I'm a bit of a political junkie, and sometimes when I'm listening to all these political speeches, it occurs to me that the Bible is being wielded as a bit of a political weapon. Now, I'm far from perfect myself, but sometimes when I listen to these candidates quote Scripture, I find it hard to suppress my disbelief because, well, frankly, there is nothing else in that candidate's life that would make me think that he or she is actually a practicing Christian. They quote a verse here or there in an effort to win the hearts of the crowd. But then they openly live as if the Bible doesn't actually exist and God isn't watching. It's exactly what you find in these final verses of the 50th Psalm. Now, of course, politicians are pretty easy to pick on because, right, everybody does it. They're the low-hanging fruit because they live their lives in a constant media spotlight and it's really easy to see their hypocrisy. It's not so easy with me. It's not so easy with you. And that's really the reason I want you to pay attention to what this psalm says. According to the psalmist, it is not a small matter to put on a robe of religiosity and pretend to be a child of the Most High God. You might be able to fool the masses. You might even be able to fool your family. But honestly, you're not fooling God. And the psalmist says, God notices when people do this. But to the wicked, God says, what right have you to declare my statutes or take my covenant in your mouth, seeing you hate instruction and cast my words behind you? So let me try to explain this. The Bible wasn't written as a collection of wise sayings and folk wisdom. This is not just a story. This is a covenant document. It's a description of an agreement between God and the people who have agreed to be in a relationship with Him. And it lays out some distinct expectations for the people who have consented to represent God in this world. This is not just an ancient storybook. This is the story of how God interacts with His covenant people and how the relationship is supposed to work. And it tells this sad story of how the human race repeatedly violates the terms of this contract, and God keeps bringing us back again and again and again because He's determined to keep this covenant going in spite of who we are. In fact, He even became a human being and kept our end of the agreement for us because we were such miserable failures. But that doesn't change the fact that people who profess to be God's children are expected to behave a certain way. Here's the way that Peter describes it in the New Testament. Just listen to this. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, His own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from the fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. So here's how this kind of works. The human race was originally created in God's image, and our entire existence was supposed to be an advertisement for the goodness and righteousness of the Creator. We were intended to be proof positive that God is good. But then we turned our backs on Him and decided to go our own way. And from that point forward, it's been very hard to point to the human race and say, man, this is what God is like. Because you and I are hardly Exhibit A for the glory of God. So then God sends His Son, who not only pays the penalty for my sins, but He lives the perfect human life, the one and only example of a human being who completely satisfies the righteous character of God. He who has seen me, Jesus said, has seen the Father. In other words, Jesus kept our end of the bargain. And so you and I have been forgiven. And through what the Son of God did for us, we have been restored to our position as examples of the glory of God. Now, we don't earn our salvation through good behavior because, well, that would be impossible. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't expect us to live in harmony with Him anyway. If we're going to take the words of this covenant document on our lips, then our lives are supposed to show that we actually believe what this says. So, in the world of politics, we see Scripture quoted, prayer breakfasts attended, and lots of lip service to the pages of this book. But then we see policies and behaviors that suggest it was just an act. People seem to put on the Christian faith because it's attractive to voters, not because God is personally attractive to them. And again, listen, I'm hardly one to talk because you will find lots of inconsistencies in my life. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't take the words of the psalmist to heart. Now, here's the interesting thing that God points out about this shallow outward adoption of His covenant. He says that when we do this, we are driven by this thought that God is like us. You thought I was altogether like you, He says. The covenant of salvation was intended to make us more like God, to restore us in God's image, to pull us in His direction. In the book of Revelation, it says that God assembles His people on Mount Zion and He writes His name, His very character, in their foreheads. But when we cast aside God's moral law and do the things mentioned in this psalm, like stealing or committing adultery or lying, then what we're doing is remaking God in our image, because we're insisting that God doesn't care about these things, when in fact it's us who doesn't care. It's really a form of idolatry. When you take a look at the gods of pagan mythology, you'll notice that they look a lot like the very worst things about the human race. These gods are petty and violent and vindictive because these are gods that were made in our image. And when we take the name of Christ and then live as if the sins that put Him on the cross are no big deal, well, what we're suggesting to the world is that God doesn't mind a little pain and suffering, that He's perfectly okay with misery. And our lives begin to suggest to the world exactly what fallen angels have been trying to say about God all along. The one who made us couldn't possibly be righteous. You know, for better or for worse, a lot of the world still looks to this country, the United States, as representative of Christianity. And here's where I'm going to run into a little bit of trouble because we don't have time to study this out. But for many generations, students of Bible prophecy have seen the rise of America in the second beast of Revelation 13. Because the New World is exactly the place where the persecuted masses of Europe fled to find liberty. Revelation 12 says the earth opened up to help the persecuted woman or the church. And the second beast comes up out of that same earth. And it has no crowns on its horns because it's a republic and not a monarchy. Now, if I had a lot more time, I'd spell this out in more detail, but I don't. So here's the thing to notice for now. It says this is a lamb-like beast. It's Christ-like in the beginning, but then it opens its mouth and it speaks like a dragon. In other words, the very problems that led to persecution in the old world are going to resurface right here in the most Christian nation on earth. I'll be right back after this.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
The Bible predicts that the whole world goes in the wrong direction before Jesus comes. The picture painted in the final chapters can seem pretty bleak unless you happen to know the end of the story. All you have to do is read a few verses out of Revelation chapter 13 to see what I'm talking about. So let's do that. Let me read to you. It says, Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So now what you get is mandatory worship, which is completely contrary to the way that God Himself operates. God gives us freedom of choice. And this is completely contrary to the way that the United States was originally formulated. And I wish I could say that I don't already see trends going in this direction, but unfortunately, as I watch what's going on in this world, I can already see them. As one famous American president once pointed out, we are never more than one generation away from losing our liberty. What we have right now is exceedingly rare. Real personal liberty hasn't actually happened very often if you look over the course of human history. And who knows how long it might take until this particular scenario shows up. Maybe it'll happen in my lifetime, maybe not. But one thing I do know, for 2,000 years now, this book has never been wrong, not even once. Let's continue reading. Now we're in verse 13. It says, He performs great signs, so that He even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And He deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which He was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So here's the interesting thing. A lot of popular faith-based movies and books kind of make it seem like the biggest problem we're going to face in the future is going to come from secular sources. I hear stories about atheist governments who try to eliminate the practice of religion or crack down on Christians as they try to operate in the public sphere. But that is not the story you find in this book. The biggest problems in the world, according to this, actually come from the inside. They come from us. So this is where we're going to be headed, right here. And if we think that nominal Christianity is a problem right now, if we think people merely use religion to get elected or improve their standing in a popularity poll, well, we haven't seen anything yet. So, what exactly am I supposed to do about it? Well, there's not a lot I can do to control other people, people who profess to be part of God's covenant people, but actually take His words and toss them behind themselves the way the psalm describes. This is a problem that is outside of my control. I can't change it. So what I have to ask myself is, what can I control? And what I can control is me. This is it. This is the sole realm of my own personal influence. You know, it's one thing to take the Bible and use it to measure all the people who live in your proximity. And believe me, I know Christians love to do that. But it's a completely different exercise to open this book and use it to measure myself. So this is where it starts. It starts with me. And while the freedom to believe is still available right now, I can do something to make sure the character of God is on display in a land designed to make that possible. By what I do. I can do that for now. You know, it's one thing to talk about your faith. That's the easiest part of living like this book says. But it's a completely different thing to stop trying to run the show myself and actually cooperate with the God who has offered to include me in His covenant. If I could just get out of the way and quit trying to run the show, then maybe God could start doing something with this horribly flawed character that I have, and maybe I could start living like the words in this book actually mean something to me. If I'm going to take the words of this covenant in my mouth, then I've got to live like this. And suddenly, when I want to share what this book says with somebody else, maybe, just maybe, there will be a little bit of evidence in my life to suggest that this book is for real. A lot of people take these words and they cast them behind themselves. I can't control that, but I can control me. And maybe my life could become, by God's grace, a display of what God intends to do in this universe for His people. Thanks for joining me. This has been Authentic. My name is Shawn Boonstra.